Hey everybody, this is Dawn with Painted Willow Art. I have a new paint-along idea that we're going to try today, and I haven't done this one yet, so we're going to kind of wing it as we go and see what happens. I am in my inside art room today instead of my outside art room, so you can see my messy paint background. If you paint much and are on a surface you don't want to wreck, I cover mine with a white butcher paper, so if I splatter paint over it, it doesn't get on my table underneath, and when I want to test colors, I can just do it real quick on the paper next to me and see what it's going to do. So that's kind of a handy tip if you're painting on a surface that you don't want to get paint on. Cover it with a little bit of white butcher paper, and then you have a nice test palette as well. So today we're going to create a heart with some gradient color and some doodles on it. And we're going to create what look like, kind of like sun rays coming out of it. And so I will show you how to do that with some tape. So for today, what I'm using is a piece of 140-pound watercolor paper. This, I think it was originally 11 by 14 to start with, so I just cut it in half. You can use whatever size you want to. I've taped it to my board already. I am using just plain masking tape on mine because that's what I've got right now. I do know that this masking tape, however, is pretty sticky, so I think I've mentioned this in other videos before. It's a good idea to test the tape you're using on a scrap piece of paper, stick it down really good, and then try and peel it off and see if it rips the paper. If it does, which I know this masking tape is going to because it's really sticky masking tape because I already tested it. Usually what I do is just take that strip of tape and tape it like to my leg on my pants for a minute, and then I pull it off and put it on here. By putting it on my pants, it gets just a little bit of fuzz on the back of it, so it takes off just a little bit of the sticky, just enough to keep it from ripping the paper. So if you're not sure what your tape does, test it first, and if you need to, stick it on your pants or your shirt or something to get a little fuzz on it to take some of the sticky off so it doesn't rip your paper, that's a good way to do that. I think I'm only going to use 2 brushes today. This one, and I apologize, my light's not fantastic in here, is it? It's just so hot in the garage today. My studio's in the garage, and it's kind of hot out there today, and I didn't get the air turned on in time, so I'm doing it in here. This is a number 8 round watercolor brush. This one is a 3/4 inch flat wash brush, and we're going to use that to do the main wash. I'm only going to use 2 colors of paint today, and I am going to use liquid watercolors today just because I want to play with them. These are Ecoline liquid watercolors. This one is magenta. This one is a purple. It's called ultramarine violet. So I'm using magenta and ultramarine violet, and what I've done already, these, if you've not used liquid watercolors, just so you can see, they come with a little dropper in them. So I've taken and just put a little dropper of purple and a little dropper of magenta on there. If you don't have liquid watercolors, use what you have. If you're using pan watercolors or tube watercolors, get yourself a palette, a plate, something to put them on, and just mix up whatever 2 colors you want to use. If you don't want to use magenta and purple, you don't have to. You could use blue and yellow, and you'll get a green gradient. You could use yellow and orange. You could use red and yellow and get an orange gradient. So whatever colors you want to use, just mix up a little bit of each color so that you've got a liquid puddle of each color going. And we do want them to be fairly light, not too heavily pigmented, so we're not getting a really dark tone on this to start with. On my paper, I'm going to draw a heart in the middle. And you can draw whatever kind of heart you want. I would recommend that you draw it kind of light. We are going to go over this with a pen and outline it when we're done, but pencil can be kind of hard to watercolor over, and then you can't erase it from underneath. So I like to do mine light just to make sure I don't have, too much sticking out there that I need to get rid of later. And I did put a tail on it, but I think I'm going to take my tail off, so I'm going to erase that now. If the pencil you draw with draws really heavy, go ahead and draw your heart on, but then I usually come back, whatever I'm drawing, and take my eraser and just lightly kind of go over the lines, just to erase them just a little bit, and that makes them even fainter still, so you can hardly see that now on the camera. but I can still see it on my paper. So if your pencil does draw real heavy, just go back over it with an eraser real quick and lighten it up a little bit. So to do this, we're going to start by just covering our paper with water. So I'm going to take my wash brush and dip it in the water, and I'm just going to paint water onto my paper. I'm not looking for it to be sopping wet. I just want a nice sheen. I've showed this to you before, and I'll show you in just a second as soon as I get a little bit of water on here. I just want a nice shiny sheen across my paper. So there's just a little bit of water that helps the paint move. For some reason, I keep missing that one spot right there. So let me see if I can get this in the light. See that shiny sheen? It's not sopping wet. It's not leaving puddles. There's just a little bit of a sheen, and you can see where the line is where I stopped. Shiny here, not shiny here. So that shiny sheen is what we're going for. And go ahead and cover your entire piece of paper. I told you that mine is a half of an 11 by 14 sheet. I don't know that I would do too much bigger if this is the first time you're doing a gradient, because it can be a little hard to manage because you need the paper to be wet to do this. So there we go. I've got that nice shiny sheen across my whole paper, right? Now, I'm going to make sure I have a little bit of my magenta mixed up. And all I did was take what I dropped in here and put it in the next well and put some water in it because I don't want it really, really dark. So you can see the difference between the two. This is full strength. This is watered down. So I'm going to water it down just a bit. And I'm just going to kind of start painting circles in my heart. And all the circles are really doing is just kind of defining where that heart is, and it's going to be a nice way for it to fade out to the purple. Okay, so I'm going to clean my brush off, and I'm going to do the same thing with the purple. I'm going to put some water in this well next to it and take just a little bit of purple and water it down. So again, hopefully in my bad light here, you can see the difference. This is a little bit lighter than the full strength pigment. And I'm going to do the same thing with the purple. I'm just going to kind of expand those circles that I started with the magenta out to the edge. And as I get here by the magenta, I'm just going to kind of swipe back and forth across the two gently, and they're going to mix themselves together. Okay? And then I'm going to do the same thing down here at the bottom. And I'm just going in circles, half circles, I guess, at this point, around the magenta that I started with. And where they butt up against each other, I'm just real gently going to rub my brush back and forth so that they mix into each other. Okay? So we have something like that. You'll notice on this, and I know, even though my light's not very good, you can see that it's very, very light. I've not used the paint full strength. I've watered it down pretty good. So you want to start really, really, really light. And at this point, we need to dry this before we do the rest of it. So I'm going to put you on fast speed, and I'm going to blow dry this. So if you've got a blow dryer, pause the video if you need to. Grab your blow dryer or take your painting to wherever your blow dryer is. Blow this dry so that the entire surface is dry, okay? Okay, so before we do the next step, make sure that your paper is really dry. So just kind of take your hand, wipe it across it, touch it here and there, make sure it feels dry. If it feels a little bit damp anywhere, hit it with the blow dryer again. And I've mentioned in past videos, I usually blow dry mine on the coolest setting because sometimes heat can affect the way the paint looks. If it's not drying very well, go ahead and kick it up to like the middle heat setting. Just don't do it on the high heat setting. And hit it again and make sure that paper's completely dry. And the reason we need it completely dry is because we're going to stick some tape to it. And if it's wet at all, that tape's going to peel and you're not going to get nice crisp lines. So if you need to pause the video and hit it again with the blow dryer, go ahead and do that. If you're good and dry, then we're going to go to the next step, which is adding some tape lines on here to give us the sun ray look. So I've just pulled off a piece of the masking tape. I am going to pull that edge and try and make sure it's fairly straight. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to ultimately outline it with pen. And then just stick it down right against the edge of where you drew your heart. And make sure that that's down really, really well. So hopefully you can see here's the outline of my heart. So I just stuck the edge of that masking tape right up against the outline of my heart. Press it down really well, and it's extending out towards the corner of the paper. You don't have to do it right at the corner like I did. You could do it anywhere. Just pick a starting spot. And then we're going to do the same thing again. Again, I'm going to make sure my edge is fairly straight. If you want to cut it with scissors, you can. I'm just going to tear it. Because like I said, ultimately we're going to go back over this line with a pen anyway. So if it's a little bit off, it's okay. And I'm going to go just a little bit away from where my first one was. And stick it down against that edge right up against the line on my heart. And I'm going to continue doing that all the way around. Now, don't worry if these aren't perfectly evenly spaced and straight. That's kind of the fun in this, is that it doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to do some doodles on this when we're done. So if it's a little bit wonky, it's okay. Actually, I like that edge of the tape better. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And just continue all the way around and make sure, you know, run your finger down the edges of the tape really good. Make sure you've got it all pressed down so that we don't get paint bleeding under the tape. Okay, so this is what we've got. The tape butts up against the line that I drew for my heart all the way around. And fans out to the edge. We've made sure it's pressed down really, really well. And now we're going to do essentially the same thing we just did. We're going to go back over both sections with more of the same color. So what it's going to do is darken where we painted to begin with, and it's going to leave what's under the tape a little bit lighter. Okay, so with my wash brush again, I'm going to come back to my watered down magenta. If you used all of what you watered down last time and need to make a little bit more, make a little bit more, so you've got the same 2 paints watered down. And I'm going to go right back over my heart. If you need a little bit of water, because it feels like it's just sticky, go ahead and clean your brush off and dip it in just plain water and give it a little bit of water to go with it. The reason I didn't have us wet the whole palette this time is because you get too much water on, or wet the whole paper this time is because if you get too much water on here, your paint's going to peel. And we want to leave the paint stuck down till we're finished. So I've got my magenta on there, and now I'm going to come back with the purple and do the same thing I did before. I used all of mine last time though. So I put just some plain water in there. I'm going to grab a little bit of the purple, mix it in. I'm going to put a little bit more water because I've got pretty big purple space. So there I've got my watered down purple again. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. Just go back over where you were before. And again, at the edges where the purple and the magenta meet, just real gently kind of wipe your brush back and forth across where they meet, and it will let the colors mix together. Same thing down here at the bottom. And where the colors meet down here on the bottom, just gently swipe your brush back and forth over that junction. It lets them blend together a little bit. So what you'll notice as you do this is that my magenta isn't sticking strictly to the outline of my heart, and that's okay. There's a little bit of magenta out over here on each side. There's a little bit of purple in my heart. That's okay. I don't need the heart to be completely defined by the paint. I just want the paint to kind of blend together and spread. So this is what I've got. It's a little lighter in a couple spots where they meet together, and that's perfectly fine. That still gives you a little bit of interest, and keeps the gradient maintained. Okay, so we're going to hit this with a blow dryer again. So pause the video, go grab your blow dryer, dry it again. I'm going to speed mine up. Remember, do it on the lightest setting. If it's not drying really well, you can bump it up one setting to a little bit of heat. Just don't use high heat on this, okay? So I'll be back in just a second once mine's dry. Okay, I'm back. Mine is dry. If you wanted to make your colors a little more vibrant, you could certainly do that whole process again. Put a third coat on it. With watercolors, with every layer, the colors get deeper and more vibrant. If you're a little more experienced and have done washes before and you want to start with a heavier color, you can certainly do that as well. I just find that sometimes, particularly if you haven't done a gradient like this before, when you use a lot of paint to begin with, meaning the paint's really dark and bright, those two don't go together, do they? You know what I mean. When the paint is really vibrant, it can be hard to get that gradient. So I wanted to do this with light colors the first time so that you have hopefully some success with that gradient before you try and do it with a heavier pigment load. So from here, like I said, if you want to do it again, make it darker, you certainly can. I'm going to leave mine at this, but I am going to add some little polka dots here and there to it. So that's where my number 8 brush comes in. And I'm going to go into, actually I've got to mix up a little bit more. Hang on a second. That washed down purple that I was using, that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to load up my brush, not too heavy, with some of that washed down purple. And I'm just going to go in here randomly and paint in some polka dots. And I'm going to do mine fairly large. So you can see, it's not real dark. It's just essentially adding one more layer. So you can put those all over the place. Make some of them kind of go off the page so you've only got half a dot. Or make it butt up to one of the pieces of tape. Again, so you've only got a partial dot. And all that does is just make it a little more interesting. You see up there, I've got a partial dot. So we're just going to do that all the way around. Just put a few dots here and there. Make them whatever size you like them. They're not going to really stand out because we're just using one more layer of that light color. And that's what I want. I don't want them to be really bright and vibrant. I want them to kind of be background. Okay, So we got something like that. Once you've got your dots on there, hit it with the blow dryer again. So I'll be right back. Okay, so we're back and everything's dry. Now comes the untaping part. And for me, this is always the best of times and the worst of times. Because even though we tried to get these pressed down as good as we can, sometimes the paint can bleed underneath. So we're just going to go around and pull up each of these corner ones, or each of the rays carefully. And see what we got underneath. So see where we left that, it's lighter. So we're going to do that same thing all the way around. Now you might find, as you're pulling these up, like this one, that the paint did bleed underneath the tape a little bit. Don't sweat about that, because we're going to go back and doodle on top of this. We're going to cover up that as best we can. Go ahead and pull all your tape off. And go ahead and untape the edges as well, because we're done with paint at this point. We're going to do a little bit of doodling from here. So go ahead and pull it all off. I love the way the tape around the edge gives it almost a little frame look, because we've got that white border, so it's kind of a neat way to give your painting a little bit of a finished look without too terribly much effort. Now, can you see my masking tape pulling the paper off the back of my board? It's the back side of a mat board. So where I said at the beginning that if the tape's sticky, you might need to put it on, put it on your leg, on your pants or something to put a little bit of fuzz on it. This is why. This masking tape is really, really sticky, and I didn't get that end quite fuzzy enough, so it's peeling the paper off the back of my mat board. And that's okay, because I don't care on the mat board. At least it didn't rip my painting, right? So here's what we've got. And you can see there are some spots where it bled under the tape. You really just kind of have to play around with different kinds of tape and see what works best for you. It is a little tricky when you're putting water over the top of tape, because water's going to peel tape anyway. Sometimes washi tape can work a little bit better, and I'm still waiting for my washi tape to come. So play around with the tape you have. You can do this on a scrap piece of paper before you sit down to do it for real. But what I want you to see is where this lighter is. I don't know if you can see it in the light. It's got that light purple on there because we started with that really light background, and then as we went darker, that stayed lighter. And then the third layer went darker still. So we didn't use really anything different with the paint. We used the same watered down paint that we started with. Just with each layer, it gets a little darker and a little darker. So with this, we're now going to add some doodles. So I am going to use my trusty Sharpie. You can use whatever pen you want to. I'm going to do black on this one. Certainly if you want a different color, you could use a different color. And I really don't have a plan in mind with this. I'm going to start by outlining my heart on the line that I drew. There we go. I used an extra fine Sharpie for that, and you'll notice that even that extra fine Sharpie kind of cleaned up some of these edges where the paint had bled a little bit, where the tape met the heart. So that's what I was meaning a minute ago. When you outline this and start putting doodles on, a lot of where that tape bled is going to go away. I am going to grab a fine point Sharpie for my lines here, just to give me some different line thicknesses. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Only I'm not going to do them exactly straight. I'm going to kind of give them some little wiggles. And what those wiggles are letting me do is fix wherever that unevenness is. And the wiggles are going to give it a little bit of character. So even though we used the tape to make these straight, we don't have to keep the outlines straight, so that we can cover up a little bit of the paint bleed. So you end up with something like that. Okay? If your paint did not bleed and you want to leave your lines straight, certainly do them straight. But what I'm hoping that you see by that is that even if the tape didn't stay stuck and some of the paint bled underneath it, it's not a catastrophe. You don't have to throw it away and start over. You just change your doodles a little bit. Okay, so there we go. So by using wiggly lines, I've given it a little bit of character, and I've covered up all the spots where the paint bled, so it doesn't look like a hot mess anymore, right? Hopefully. Okay, from here, we're just going to add some more doodles to it. And like I said, I don't really have a plan for this, so I'm not going to do anything terribly complicated. I'm going to look at things like basic shapes and just things that are really easy to draw. So what have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 6. So I think what I'm going to do is do every other one the same thing, and then I'll do something different on the other 3. So I'm going to start with this one, and I'm just going to draw little swirlies like that. And I'm going to do them all over. You can do some going the other direction. And I'm just going to fill that whole space with them. And don't worry if when you're drawing, your drawing is a little bit wiggly like the lines. That's perfectly okay. That's part of the fun of doodles, is that they don't have to be perfect. They often have more character when they're not. So because I didn't really plan this out, lay anything out, you'll notice that I have spots where I've got space left, that the ones the big size don't fit. So just fill those in with some smaller ones. Again, different sizes helps give it a little bit of character. So we just filled in all those little spaces with some small curly cues. Okay, so on mine, I'm going to do the same thing in this one up here and this one over here, so that I'll have one in between that'll be different. So I'm going to speed you up for a second while I do those. You do the same thing. If you want to do something different in your other ones, that's fine. You don't have to do it exactly the way I'm doing it. It just feels like what I want to do right now. So I'm going to speed this up while I do my other ones. Okay, so I've got all my little swirls on there in every other spot. So now I'm going to go back to the 3 that don't have anything. I'm going to put something else in those. And I think in this one, I'm going to put leaves. So I'm just going to do a real easy leaf shape. You can see that. Yep. And I'm going to do them facing all different directions. Because if they're all going the same direction, it can look a little, I don't know, too linear for me. And doodles are not supposed to be linear. They're just kind of all over the place. So there's my little leaves. And in this one, I think I'm going to, what am I going to do? I think I'm just going to do big circles in this one, but I'm going to overlap the circles. So kind of like that. But just keep going and fill the whole thing up. Do them all different sizes. They don't all have to overlap. So there we go. There's my circles. Got it filled all up. Usually with doodles, more is more instead of less is more. The more you get on there, the better it starts to look. And that's just the nature of doodles. So I've got my circles up there at the top. So now I'm going to do one more down here. So down here, I think I'm going to follow along with the squiggly lines and put some more squiggly lines. Like that. And then I'm going to come back and do them the other direction and make kind of a squiggly line checkerboard thing going on. So we have that. Okay, so we're getting there. We're starting to look like something here. Doodles don't have to be hard. Basic shapes, random squiggles, lines, checkerboards, those kind of things. Even though none of these squiggles technically go together as far as a theme, when you start putting them together and you get them all on there, even though they're not the same general shapes, it does start to take on a cohesive look. If you're not sure what to doodle, Pinterest is a good place to look for doodles. You can search for doodles on Pinterest and it will come up with tons of stuff that will give you ideas. So we've got those on there. I'm not quite done with this though yet because like I mentioned before, for me, more is more when it comes to doodles. So I'm going to add some more to this. I think the first thing I'm going to do is put some dots in my heart. So I'm going to use my bigger Sharpie because I want these to kind of be bigger and I want them colored in. So down one side of my heart. I've got my dots. And then on some of my lines separating the darker and lighter colors, I'm going to put just some, in a second I'll show you this. I know you probably can't see through my hand. I'm going to put just these little straight lines that makes it almost look like little stitches there. So I'm just going to put two of those little lines here and there. Every now and then I'll probably throw in a single, and I'm going to do that all the way around. There's really no rhyme or reason to them, so just where they look good to you, where your hand thinks it wants to go. They don't all have to be pointing the same direction. So where some are going up that way, the others are going up that way. So change direction with them so they're not all the same. So there we've got the little lines on there. I am a big fan of dots in my doodling. So I'm going to add some more dots on here where those light spots meet the heart. I'm just going to put a couple little dots. You can put however many you'd like, or you could put a different shape if you want. There's no reason you couldn't put little squares or little triangles. So we got little dots on there. And I'm still feeling like my light lines are standing out maybe a bit more than I want them to. And that's something that's kind of hard to tell when you're first doing it. You know, how much they're going to stand out is going to change depending on how many layers you do, what colors you're using. If you were using something like yellow and orange and you were washing them out, diluting them pretty good, these lines might not stand out quite as much. They ended up standing out quite a bit on there. If you like it that way, leave it. I think I'm going to go in and add a few more squiggly lines in that light spot just to put something in there because it just feels a little empty to me. So, okay, it's upside down, but you'll get the idea. So they're just little squiggly lines. Again, they're not anything that has any planned out shape or pattern. And I think I'm going to put a couple little lines at the top of my heart up there. And I'm going to put a couple little lines at the bottom of my heart down there. And I might put some dots coming off of a couple of those lines, just because I like my dots. And I think we're going to call it good there. So there you go. Don't forget to sign it, because you have to sign your artwork. Every great artist must sign their artwork, and every single one of us is a great artist. So there you go. There's a little doodle heart with a watercolor wash background. You can see those purple dots that we put on there. Because we used that same watered down paint, so it was just another layer of the wash. They're not terribly dark, but they do give it a little bit of interest there in the background, right? If you have something like metallic watercolors and you wanted to do those dots in metallics just to give it a little oomph, you could have certainly done that. You could have done the whole thing in metallics. So there you go. And it actually, with multiple layers on there, ended up being pretty vibrant anyway. It's not washed out. The doodles give it a lot of character. These are fun to do just to sit and do something to draw that's not terribly complicated. You can do these on the front of greeting cards. You can buy blank watercolor greeting cards. You could do something like this on the front of a greeting card, make your own greeting cards. You could give it to somebody as a gift just how it is, you know, maybe write a note on the back for them. All kinds of ideas you can do with this. So give that a try. Let me know how you do with it. If you get stuck and have any questions, absolutely holler at me. I'm happy to answer the questions. And I will see what I can come up with for the next paint along, okay? Have fun painting, everybody. Thanks.